And finally, and this is the one I know I've been waiting for this for months, Eric Kraus is going to present us an opt-out policy and payment structure for those residential customers who, for some unknown reason, are refusing smart meter installation or service. I got embarrassed about this before, but I do not see Eric.
I saw him earlier.
He was here.
Eric, oh, yeah.
He stepped out because we had a schedule.
Ah, all right. It's President Bowie Thompson's fault. So are we bringing... Oh, there he is. There we go.
Sorry about that. We already announced what I'm going to cover here?
Yes, and we're...
Okay.
After presentation.
Except for the punchline, which how much are we going to charge them?
Yeah. All right. Real quick agenda. There's a lot of items here we want to cover. Want to go over the rate authority, the resolution that was adopted last year, allowing for some charges on opt-out. Little update on where we are with SMUD's customer refusals. High-level opt-out overview for the U.S. and California, giving an update on where things are with that. Talk about the analysis approach that we took to come up with our recommendation, the options that we considered. Talk about some of the impacts of offering an opt-out program, some high-level cost assumptions, a summary of the cost analysis, a little comparison of offering an opt-out versus not offering an opt-out, then the recommended policy, and then also some commercial communications and residential communications, assuming you agree with our recommendation. So this is just a straight out of the rates book. It was approved resolution number 110806 in August 4th, 2011, section 20 says adopt upfront and monthly fees that would be implemented should this board of directors in the future authorize customers to opt out of the smart meter solution. The upfront and monthly fees are intended to cover the costs of the installation of alternative metering solutions, meter reading, billing, and related administrative costs. So where are we now? We have more than 600,000 meters installed. We're still installing them today. We're going after those last few thousand difficult installs. Refusals overall on all the meters that we have to go, we have about 614,000 meters total, is at approximately 0.38%. That changes daily. Some people call us and say, you know, I'm going to go ahead and have my meter installed, and every time we attempt, every day, we might get one or two more refusals. So where we're at, and this is a round number, it's not exact, it changes daily or weekly, is we have approximately 2,500 refusals to date, 200 commercial, industrial, and agriculture, and 2,300 residential. The commercial, industrial, and agriculture, it's kind of a smattering. We did a little research to say, is there a trend here? What we found is that those are primarily manufacturing, agriculture, retail, and real estate. So I'm guessing the real estate is probably property management firms that own multiple units or something like that. But other than that, there are a smattering of other commercial accounts. Residential, as I'd mentioned in previous presentations, there are some that are concerned about RF, a very small number. There are some that have talked about privacy. There are some that have talked about cybersecurity. But in general, most of the people are just telling them, I don't want the meter. You know, this other meter's working fine. Why would I do this? So opt-out overview, U.S. and California. There's a lot of different things going on in the U.S. Nationally, the PUCs and utilities are considering opt-out policies. Some utilities have decided that they won't offer opt-out. Other utilities have been required by the CPUCs to offer alternatives, and the pricing of alternatives varies drastically. Just to give you an example, some utilities that said no opt-out are Burbank Water and Power, City of Lakeland, Florida, and AEP, Texas. Portland General Electric had an approved opt-out for $254 up front and $51 a month. And other utilities on the far other side is $10 a month with bi-monthly read. They don't even charge an upfront. That's Central Vermont Public Services. So it's a pretty dramatic difference out there in what is happening with this. The CPUC, I'm sure you've seen, recently ruled that PG&E must offer an opt-out. The basics about their program is it's residential customers only. It's an analog meter. It's a $75 upfront, $10 a month fee for your standard customer, and $10 up front and $10 a month for care, which is the equivalent of an eBird customer for SMUD. They also have been allowed, and this is something that's kind of not really stated out there in the promotion of this, is that they can set up an accounting of actual costs for consideration during future rate actions. So,
for commercial customers, what are the refusals? What is the PUC doing with refusals?
there is no option for a commercial opt-out.
So you just cut them off?
Well, they install the meter or move forward with other procedures to disconnect. Yes.
God bless them.
You enter the people's property and take the meter.
Yeah. Well, you'll disconnect service.
Disconnect service.
You basically give them the option to take the meter or have their service disconnected.
Could you speak for a moment to, you said Burbank and someone else?
Burbank, Water and Power, City of Lakeland, Florida, and AEP, Texas.
Okay, and any experience report from them of reaction to that?
There's a lot of negative feedback, but I haven't heard any more on theirs than those utilities that have offered opt-outs at a price. I think they've been under the radar. They aren't very popular with the press. So opt-out analysis, we've been working on this for about 6 months. We started out by identifying potential opt-out alternatives. We talked with other utilities. We also had SAIC, a consultant firm that we've used on many projects, look out there and talk with other utilities they'd work with, get kind of a benchmark of what others are offering. We evaluated the various alternatives and selected the best solution. We defined the program details, identified the impacts and related costs, and actually made quite a few presentations to the executive committee to get feedback and updates and information from them. And here we are at this today to provide that board recommendation. So the options considered, we looked at the analog meter. Analog meter from a reality perspective is difficult. There's very few companies that manufacture those, so if you have an analog meter, you pretty much have to maintain the ones you have or buy them on a secondary market and fix them and maintain them. Not to mention there's accuracy issues there. The ERT meter was an option, but we figured it wasn't the best option because we couldn't get interval data from it, and we wanted to see that we could have interval data so that we'd have that information going forward. The phone line meter, those were just simply very expensive. It uses an old 4800 baud modem, so it's pretty slow, and it just would be expensive for customers as well. Prepay meter, we looked at that. You know, if you want to opt out, we'll give you a prepay meter. But without having a smart meter in place, prepay, as we've learned through pilots, is very difficult to implement. It can be pretty expensive. There's a lot of upfront costs, kiosks, etc. And it's not really convenient to the customer anyway. We looked at a solid-state interval meter, which is basically buying a meter without a radio, without a NIC, etc. And we determined that's really pretty much the same as a smart meter with the radio off, except you're basically saying we aren't moving forward with the smart meter here. Smart meter radio off, and that's the one that we've basically settled on at this point. And then, of course, the no opt-out. So what are the impacts of offering an opt-out? There are several, both for SMUD and for the customers. The SMUD business impacts are you have to set up, in essence, parallel operational processes. You need to set up processes for meter reading, meter shop, credit, and collections. So a lot of the work that we had done technology-wise and process-wise to automate and make things cleaner, you have to go back and adjust that for this group. Upfront technology integration and ongoing technology costs every year to keep the integrations operating. Separate inventory control for opt-out meters. It's not a huge number of meters, but you still have to keep track of those. And a little bit of impact on the overall smart grid strategy, because you won't have smart meters there, so you can't ping them to see if they're out of power or not.
Eric, could you back up 1 second?
Sure.
And pardon my ignorance, but if it's the smart meter with the radio off, how do we read the meter?
Manually, with an optical reader and a laptop.
So somebody's out there on a truck.
Yeah, they're
And
actually
it's not even
walking up to the meter.
It's not even the drive-by technology that we were doing, and
No, it's not.
And could we have done the drive-by instead? Did we think about that? Would that make any sense?
One of the we did look at the ERT, which is a drive-by, but one of the criteria we had when we talked about what we wanted the system, what limitations we wanted to have put on the system when we go to an opt-out, or if we go to an opt-out, was that we wanted to receive interval data. And with the ERT meters, interval data is not an option. There isn't an option where you can gather that, because interval data helps us better plan for load and power purchases.
But if we're looking at less than 0.5%, I think was the number, do we need 100% interval data? Could we not get by with 99.5%?
Well,
Just curious.
I think the interval data is actually for that specific customer. So what it is that, and that's really, if you think about ERT meters, there's really no different than putting a smart meter without the transmitter. So you're not really buying much from the customer's perspective. If the customer is worried about the smart meter, putting an ERT meter on there is basically a digital meter without. So there's really there's no radio. So you're not really gaining much at all.
Well, I also wonder if we tell them, okay, you have a smart meter, but the radio's off, how that's going to be accepted. Well, wait a second, I don't want a smart meter.
But I guess what it is that the ERT meter is not any better because the ERT meters still transmit one way. So if the concern about having no transmission, there's no difference.
They are transmit.
Okay.
Could I ask on the 2,500?
Yes.
How many are dog problems?
Only about, they aren't necessarily dog problems because the customer just said they didn't want the meter.
But I mean, have we cross-checked? Because we know which ones we have problems with dogs.
We haven't looked at those to see how many are dog problems.
Okay. And Eric, don't we actually have another set of customers, the hard-to-install customers? That's probably where a lot of the dog problem.
Yeah, but there's only like 17 of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Tea Party guys.
So customer impacts, how does this impact the customer? Well, we won't be able to determine if the customer's power is on or off by pulling the meter, which we can do now. We won't. The usage information, although if we go this route, we have the interval data, so they'll be able to see their usage by hour. They won't be able to see it except for updated once a month versus daily. Right now it's updated every night, so they would see their usage and their patterns of usage, so they could better manage their energy that way, but it wouldn't be as frequent as it is with the smart meter. They wouldn't be able to participate in future programs leveraging the meter, things like the home area network where you have an in-home display, critical peak pricing where you've got to get a signal, and a new price signal. They wouldn't be able to enroll in those. And the other thing is, because these are a direct read, they have to provide meter readers direct access monthly to the meter. And some of these folks, it's a privacy and no access issue. And if they have to let someone go and do that, that can be an issue as well. So cost assumptions. There are a couple different things that we looked at here, and the meter install cost per meter, the thought is that this is going to cover a half-hour install up front and a half-hour removal when the customer moves out, because we figure eventually they'll drop the program or move out of that area. It's $127. New smart meter radio off, we looked at two options. We looked at using the smart meters we currently have in stock and modifying them so that they would be, in essence, a smart meter radio off meter. But what we realized when we started looking at the technical integration, having a meter that has the same meter serial number as the ones you're using automated creates a lot of heartache and headache in trying to develop the technical side of things. And you would basically have to go redo all of your technical integration you had done for smart meters. So instead, the lower cost method to do that is actually to go out and purchase a smart meter. They cost about $125 to $150 a piece, and then we have to physically disconnect the switch so that it would have a different meter series number, so it would clearly be identified. A 3 million or 5 million number instead of a 2 million number would be a smart meter. So our systems, it would be easy for people to see this is not a normal smart meter. Technical integration work, we estimate about $395,000. And then annually, because we have all of these systems linked together as we go forward with CRM and SAP, etc., we expect to spend about $130,000 a year on keeping that maintained. One of the items we don't have great data on, because part of it's dependent on how well this integration goes, is what it's going to take from a billing perspective to set up and handle the meter and the enrollment piece. In the past, with some of the other smart meter components and integration work we've done, we've been able to automate from 90 to 95% of that work. So we minimize the impact, but we just don't know yet until we get into it further whether that will be similar or whether it will require more work from either a billing or a CSR level to enroll. Monthly interval data read per meter, about $25.50 to read it. As I mentioned, they're going to be using a laptop and an optical reader. They're going to actually have to connect physically to the meter to get this interval data. So that takes, I think they can get about 4 in an hour, we calculated in drive time. And then we have to get some interval reading software because we hadn't planned that we would be doing this manually. We have to purchase that. We have to purchase some laptops and optical readers because we have a few with the meter shop, but we don't have as many as we need to do this. And then there's a monthly meter data processing fee per meter of 38 cents. That's basically, there's some manual fallout in the meter data management system that we have to fix. So a summary of the calculations, and just to explain what we did here, is when we were going over how to calculate and how to kind of allocate these, the upfront we decided just to use the cost of actually installing the meter. All of those other costs, the fixed costs related to software, integration, purchasing the laptops and the optical readers, etc., we have allocated over a 3-year period in the monthly fees. The idea being that, trying to avoid a rate shock, I guess you'd say, on an upfront fee, because if you included $400,000 of integration cost in the first upfront fee divided by 5,000 customers, you can imagine it would be a pretty shocking number there. So we allocated those over 3 years. The idea behind 3 years was we'd be reasonably certain to obtain the payback from that with customers that enrolled, and it also showed up in the fees here. What we did do is we did an analysis of 3 different scenarios. Like I mentioned, we're at about 0.38 to 0.42, depending on the week you look at it, of participation. So that's the one that we believe is closest to where we'll at least start out with the project. Some utilities, and it's been different depending on utilities that announce these programs, some of them have more people enrolled than we're already on the list. Some have less people enroll. So based on the 0.5% participation, it's 2,650 customers, be $127 up front, $39.40 monthly. If you do the 1%, which is what the IOUs have kind of calculated and assumed, it's $127 and $35.07 a month. And if you do 0.1%, 530 customers, you get all the way up to about $74 a month. Yes?
So yeah, I parsed it out, and it's a quite significant difference between the 530 to 26. It's like $1,100 for one time and $500 for 2,600. Should we go down this path? How are you going to adjust, or if you're going to adjust, depending, because it's a pretty stark difference, right, in cost for just the one-time cost. So are you going to, in our letters, going to say it could change? I mean, because depending if the pool goes up or pool goes down, I mean, how does that work?
The rate, in the rate process that the board adopted, where it contemplated a possible opt-out, there's language in there that contemplates the general manager periodically making adjustments based on the participation. It's a discretionary adjustment. Part of what staff would want to balance is you don't want to adjust it too often because it costs a lot of staff time to do that. But it would be perhaps, I don't know, we'd have to look at whether we'd look at it after a year or 2 years or something. But there is a mechanism to adjust it at some point in there.
Did you come up with a different?
No, I actually just parsed out his numbers just to see.
Unamortized.
Because it's a mix of numbers, and so I wanted to see how much the one-time costs were. They aggregate over 3 years, but I just wanted to know what the number it is. $1,100 for 530 users, and it's $466 for 2,650. So.
Yeah, and we would be accommodating by spreading it over 3 years, but with interest, and But my concern is that you started this analysis on the basis of the board saying we don't want to subsidize this. I mean, I think you pretty much heard that from us. And the difficulty here is it's a moving target. but it's a moving target both ways. And I, for one, am nervous about creating a situation where you end up with a social media effort to try to get more people to do this, therefore to lower the per-person cost, which I think could be very damaging to the entire project that we're doing. So what are your thoughts about, in other words, if you allow an adjustment based on going down, the number of customers dropping, then do we have to have an adjustment for the number going up? And you mentioned about the number could be, some people could opt in.
I'm not sure how the policy is written, Arlen, on the pricing adjustments.
It does contemplate, but again, it's discretionary at SMUD's discretion to make an adjustment based on changes in participation. It doesn't just say if participation is lower. So there is that potential for that, but it would take an affirmative action by SMUD to do that.
Yeah,
and there would be some costs that would increase, presumably.
Are we prevented from a policy which says it may be adjusted in the future, but it will not go down? That there's a floor on it?
I think one of the things that we could do is, I think what you'll see in the recommendation is a provision that would allow the general manager to make that adjustment. A change to that would be to require any adjustment to come back to the board, in which case the board could make that decision at that time. So that would be another way to do that.
Well, Paul and Elizabeth both wanted to respond as well to those questions.
Yeah, no, our thought on this is, when we actually developed this, we thought, because on the rate piece is a proxy on, how we actually collect the actual cost, and we understand they actually go both directions. And so, so what we really wanted to do and say, we want to put some certainty in, if you're going to opt in this program, here's SMUD staff's best proxy on what the cost is, with the allowance that, in the future, right, some date in the future would deem appropriate by staff that we actually go back so that, you wouldn't actually have, as Director Slayton said, that people figure out, well, if the more people I get on it, the lower it could cost, and to go on Twitter or saw something, you have 100,000 people on it or 10,000 people on it. So we really want to add some certainties, and we said this is actually a close approximation based on what other people are seeing, what our history is, and what the cost is, and we really think from our staff recommendation perspective, this is what we should go with, and then kind of leave it at that and see what happens down the road.
Are you anticipating a situation where we have the meter installed, the smart meter installed, but people would call and say, take the smart meter out and go get the analog meter that you don't have anymore and put in there?
Or I want this option.
Yeah.
You've offered the option to those who said no. I want the option too.
Jumping ahead. I know you haven't finished your presentation, but...
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we don't even know they're recommending this. Right. You might know.
I skipped to the last slide. So I was wondering, I know that rates, there has to be a clear justification, and a nexus and so forth. But I have two things. So from your experience, seeing, okay, folks, 2,500 folks out there, you're going to have to pay the $127 up front and then this $40 extra each month on top of your regular bill. Do we know how many people will say, oh, never mind, I don't want to pay an extra $40? Would it be a few percentage or some? Do we have any sense for what's happened?
I can give you, just based on a conversation I had with John, who had just, before he left, who had just had a conversation with somebody from PG&E. Mm-hmm. They've already made the announcement of what these rates are, and what they're hearing is that many of the people who had said they didn't want the meter are now saying, never mind, we'll take the meter if it's going to cost us more. Yeah. So that's just the anecdotal. Elizabeth may have more information than the anecdotal information. This was a conversation John had on Monday with somebody from PG&E.
And so in our rate action, are we able to alert customers, look, those 2,500, let's just focus on them, first of all. Can we narrow our rate action strictly to 2,500, and there is no opt-out for the folks who already have them? Just narrow it just to those folks. And then also I'm wondering, given Nancy's calculation, should we reconfigure it with, a shorter payback? Because there ought to be some whoa, okay, these are actual costs. And we're giving you a break because we're doing it over these many years versus what we ought to do is tell you to pay it right up front, all of it.
One of the things, Director Sherman, it's the board's discretion. You can certainly amend the staff recommendation based on your discussion this evening. There's some slides coming up about communication and sort of to some of the points that some of the board members have raised. Our intention is not to be having a general marketing campaign at all. This would strictly be by certified letter communication to those 2,500 customers who specifically requested an opt-out. And Eric has those in a couple of slides coming. So the intention is to be very specific to those customers only.
Paul?
Yeah.
What it's really going to cost.
Just for the board's information, I mean, even when we send the letter out, and that it's going to be a cost-based piece. From the we used to have 6,000 people that was on it. As soon as we send the letters out, you already have people calling and say, okay, well, go ahead and put the meter back on. So we have experience just by sending the letter out, not even telling them how much money it's going to be, just that it's going to cost more because it's going to be a cost-based opt-out. You already have customer calling back and said, okay, in that case, go ahead, put it in. So we actually have seen it in our territory. That's kind of reflective of what PG&E is seeing, and they haven't even seen any of the costs yet. And the other rationale, Director Schromm, about why we actually didn't go ahead and put everything, in the first year, because one of the feedback we got, we're talking to other utilities, is that like Portland went $300, and the feedback they got is that, well, basically the utility, you not really offer a customer a choice. You have jacked the cost so high that it's actually prohibitive. So you're not really thinking about, so you give the facade of you're giving a customer choice program, but you're not, because nobody's going to pay $500 up front and $50 a month, and our average bill is $80. So staff was trying to thought about, well, we heard those input from other utilities, so what is that right balance? So upfront costs, we thought, okay, well, those are the ones that if we got to sit in front and defend why we charge those, we thought we have a very good rationale and say, hey, those up front, you got to charge right away. Those that is going to take one-time integration and development, okay, it's going to take us a couple of years to do it. And now, of course, as Elizabeth said, I mean, that is up to the board in terms of how you want to modify this. But I really wanted you to understand how staff actually came up with that number, and it was really kind of through a lot of deliberation about, is it 18 months, is it 36 months, is it 24 months, and then how the numbers kind of floats around and said, well, what seems to be reasonable.
And how much, if any, is carried by the customers who are in for these customers who are opting out?
The idea is that over a 3-year period, the customers that join would cover the costs of their being part of the program, so that there wouldn't be cross-subsidization from people not participating.
There is a risk.
Well, actually, I think what's probably going to, in my estimation, what's going to happen is this is going to be subsidized, but it's a very small amount of money because the number is going to drop off precipitously. And you've priced it, and I understand the logic of how you've priced it, so that it's not totally, out of the ballpark for someone to be able to pay. So what's going to happen is that, people are going to say, that's fine, I'll take the meter. So my guess is you're going to be down probably under 500 when they see these numbers, that middle number that you put up. And so SMUD is going to bear the cost. But it's a cost to get past this problem. That's really what it is. And, because with the constraints that you've put on it, can't get in after, if you put the constraint of nobody else except this group, and if you move, the meter goes in, the calendar will take care of the problem.
Okay.
That's my view.
That may be true. The question remains, what is that cost? Because what's a small number to someone may be not a small number to someone else.
I meant the cost to the district.
To SMUD.
To the ratepayers. That's who.
But it's 600,000. It's spread over 600,000 ratepayers.
Okay, so what is that cost?
Oh, I think Eric had that.
Eric had it up there.
400,000, probably about 450,000 up front, and then 130,000 a year.
But much of that will be recovered.
Yeah, but I mean, if none of it was recovered, that would be the cost across 600,000. I don't have a calculator, so.
Yeah, because you get one person who says they want to keep it, you have to do that.
And I'm sorry, maybe I missed something, but based on what Bill said, it raises a question. If I'm an opt-out customer and then I buy a house 3 blocks away that's got the smart meter in, what are my options at that point?
If we go through the recommendation, we've created a sunset at the end of the year that no one can opt in after the end of the year. If the board wanted to shorten that or take this approach of once we, as we complete the meter installs, only those people that have refused it have the option of opting out. That would be another way of doing it. But
so in other words, they could opt out a second time once they've exercised that. It's a lifetime privilege, or
no? I think the idea is you have to opt in at your address prior to the end of this year. If you fail to do that or you move into a new address, it's a closed rate class after that.
It's going to be an interesting situation when the first time that happens.
We need to.
Okay.
So I went ahead, because we're talking about kind of the details of the policy, I went ahead to that slide. We can go back to the opt-in versus opt-out comparison. But eligibility, you'll see we have constrained this pretty tightly. Residential customers only. They must be current on payment for electric service. So in other words, if we go out to disconnect them, we will disconnect them and put in a smart meter, and they can't be on the program anymore. They must provide and maintain monthly access to the meter for purposes of meter installation, maintenance, and reading. Like I said, there are some of these folks that I expect will have problems with that. The period to exercise the option, the idea is this would be available to residential customers meeting the eligibility requirements between the date of approval and until December 31st. So after that, no new people can sign up, so it kind of gets to the social media. If it explodes in the next 9 months, then maybe there's a problem, but after that, there's no more new enrollments. And then the fee schedule, as we've already discussed, is the 0.5% fee schedule, which is $127 up front, $39.40 ongoing, and that the fees would commence no sooner than June 1st, 2012. And then, as we've said a couple times, the general manager may revise the fee schedule in the future to reflect changes in costs.
Director Carr and then Director Taylor have questions.
2 questions. One, what's the rationale behind residential only?
Well, it's the vast majority of the people that have been asking for opt-out, but also commercial customers, all of them, if not already having TOU, time-based rates that require these meters, will soon be on time-based rates. So we have to have interval meters that are reporting regularly in order to get that data and charge them the rates.
And Arlen, why do we include that provision allowing people who already have the meter to opt out? They've already opted in by agreeing to have the meter installed. Why do we give them to December to?
I think it was just, there's nothing that says we have to. I think we were just trying to balance kind of a relatively customer-friendly program with considerable limitations in it. Certainly, there would be a couple of ways of addressing that. You could say only those customers, you could limit this to only those customers who've refused the meters to date, or as of a date certain, or do not yet have one installed. And then you could limit it to those customers, and then and that would be it. That would be one way of limiting it. We chose a date as another way to limit it, but either way would work.
Just, from a project perspective, we did have some customers that didn't complain until they realized the meter was installed. They, stated they hadn't gotten the letter or read the letter. They stated that, had they been home, they would have stopped it, so on, and they didn't realize that there was an option to say, I don't want this, etc. So there is that subset of customers that we think would claim and state, I wasn't really given a chance to refuse this because I didn't believe there was one.
And when you were debating this, the opt-out versus no opt-out, how was that discussion around setting a precedent because we have other facilities in people's yards that we need permission to get to. So how did you guys work through that?
Yeah.
And ladies.
Well, I'll start. First of all, this was a slide that we jumped over, but this kind of goes through some of the things that we weighed between opt-out and no opt-out. Specific to your question, Director Carr, part of our thinking is in terms of the risk mitigation for SMUD's reputation overall. Given the publicity and the media attention focused on the situation with PG&E next door, and we wanted to, as Director Slayton alluded to earlier, contain the issue, quite frankly. And so as you see here in part of our analysis, we felt that given we've kept them under the radar screen for the most part, but given the continual media calls and inquiries we continue to receive, we felt that not having an option could cause reputational risk for SMUD as well. So part of our rationale is weighing the individual customer concerns with the overall reputational risk for SMUD as a utility, balancing those types and coming up with what we felt was a reasonable option that, again, was contained as we're discussing. So contained costs for SMUD as a utility, but also kept that sincere presentment of choice to the customer. So that was part of the rationale.
And I think to your question, you were specifically talking about kind of the refusal of our installing facilities as a setting of precedent. And you're right, we do have the right in our terms and conditions of service to install whatever we need to install in order to provide service. This is a little bit of a distinction because we're still installing a meter. It's just a meter with the radio off. But even in other situations, we do work with customers to try to accommodate their concerns. So we do have customers where if we're locating poles on their property or something, we will work with them to move them to try to accommodate their concerns. So it's not always an either or.
And we don't set the precedent that says...
I don't believe so. We're limiting it pretty tightly in this.
Don't come in my backyard to repair this pole.
Well, we do hear that frequently, and often we've had to threaten disconnection, or in some cases we've actually called the sheriff's department to provide an escort for those cases.
And that's also why it's very explicitly stated in the constraints of this recommended policy that if someone, as Eric was mentioning, refuses to allow access to the meter reads, for example, on site in the property, I mean, game over. So we're very clear on not trying to set a precedent and enabling, that balance.
Also, as Alden said earlier, there's about a couple thousand of customers that did not say they want to opt out, but yet they have not responded, giving us access. And those we actually have, send out letters and say, what if you don't have access? Basically, we will actually disconnect service because you're not responding and you're not saying that you're going to go one way or the other. So we are actually keeping it very, very tight about, whether, either you're going to go with the opt-out, which is, an option, which is what we have, or you go with the smart meter. So you can't just say, well, I'm just going to ignore you and just not give you any access to my, to the facility.
At some number, it becomes not an option. The last person can't pay the whole fee, and it doesn't fit your rationale for offering options. So at some point below the 500, there's no more opt-out, and we have to install it. So what do we do in that situation? That's still a large enough number that causes some reputational risk.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that we looked at is, this is why we're having this kind of discussion is, do we want to put a minimum cap on? I mean, that's one of the options the board actually said at the board's discretion to say, once we launch the letter, if only 100 people signed up, do you allow it because now it's cost inhibitive? And if one of the tenants that we have is, do you want to cost recovery? So that is one thing that, obviously, the board can consider is to say, do we want, because we know we want to have cost recovery, we know what the current state is do we want to put a minimum so that for sure that we know we're not subsidizing the $600,000 for 10 people.
But you can always buy water, buy bottles of water.
My comment was just along the same lines as Director Slayton's, is that, if you get into this situation where if you want full cost recovery, then you get into a situation that it just doesn't make sense or work. But if the board is trying to balance reputational risk for SMUD with the cost of a program that would avoid that reputational risk on a per customer basis, and the cost per customer to avoid reputational risk is 25 cents a customer, for instance, then the board certainly can consider how do we weigh those two, and so if we're not slaves to saying we're going to recover every penny of it, but we can have $200,000 as a cost of in making this program go smoothly with our customers and not having people waive stuff in the paper, that's a consideration.
Yeah. Renee?
A couple thoughts. So these meters we're installing with the radio off, do the exact same meters have the ability to just have the radio turned back on? Or ultimately you would have to switch out a new meter?
You'd have to switch out, because once you have a new meter series, you disable them, you get them in through the system, it just becomes more onerous to make them a smart meter again than it is to just put in a new one.
Okay, so because one of my questions is, are our customers going to actually believe that if we're saying, oh, it's a smart meter with the radio off, that we're not just going to change our mind and flip the radio on at some point? So that was one thing that came to mind. And then secondly, so you're saying we have some customers who are claiming that they would have chosen not to have the meters installed if they had known that that was an option. So how are we going to communicate? How are we going to communicate with our customers that now there is an opt-out? Are we actually going to inform all 600,000?
No.
That
No, we have a list of the customers that called us up and said, hey, I didn't want this meter. You shouldn't have installed it. We've got them down. They're part of that 2,500. So it's a fairly small subset. I want to say it's probably less than 100 that are on there. But they're on there as a refusal, but they're a refusal that has a smart meter in. We just said we won't remove your smart meter. We'll let you know if there's an opt-out option available.
Eric, why don't you go to the communication slides and show
Sure.
Director Taylor.
Okay, so commercial. Commercial communications, the idea is that if we don't offer this to commercial accounts, we'd want to inform the businesses that refused installation that they will have a smart meter. We keep the internal stakeholders informed so that everybody's prepared for the calls. The messages that we're going to have is no opt-out available due to interval and TOU billing. We will reiterate the benefits of smart meters, as well as the testing that we've done, etc. We'll outline the process for meter install, including setting up appointments and deadline to respond, and then we'll remind them that access to the meter as required is a condition of service, and if disconnection may result if access is not provided. So we'll stick a window there and say we're going to come if you don't respond. The idea is that we're going to target just the customers that requested the opt-out, so we don't want to call all our commercial customers and let them know. We send a certified or registered letter. We're working on the details of that right now to all businesses that were on the list. So we have about 200 of those right now, as an earlier slide showed. Follow-up phone call to businesses that do not respond. And then media messages, we already have those ready to react to any inquiries that they might have. Talking points for commercial and residential contact centers, so when they get the calls, they are able to explain why and what the situation is. And then a ENN to inform employees. So again, we're just targeting those 200 or so that are on our list. We're not going to tell everybody else. Residential customers, it's similar, but we're letting them know that there is an opt-out option if we go this route. Anybody that refused installation, and that's not totally accurate, refused installation or said they would have had they known they could. Again, that's the 2,300 or so we have on the list. Probably less than 100 have told us after the fact, I didn't want this darn thing, take it out. Keep the internal stakeholders informed and prepared. Same messages, very similar, except that an opt-out option provides you choice. We're doing this as a choice to the customer, not because of any concerns anybody's expressed. Alternative meters require additional costs, and we can articulate those costs at whatever level of granularity we want to, that we intend to have no cross-subsidy of costs, or we could say limited cross-subsidy of costs, and therefore the people that join are intended to bear those costs. The alternative meters do not enable the same benefits. We want to tell them the benefits that they lose. You know, you can't be on this, you can't do that. And then remind them they can still choose a smart meter. Give them a deadline, or the opt-out charges will basically, they'll be enrolled in opt-out at that point. Alternative meters will be installed in 2013. In order to get all the technology integration work done with everything we have on our plates with Smart Grid, we estimate it'll take until the end of the year before we can get the integration work done, but we will be able to start charging sooner than that. The tactics targeted only the customers again, so those 2,300 would get certified or registered letter. Same media messages, same talking points, and an ENN to inform employees. So very limited communication. We aren't going to have it up on the website saying, you know, SMUD now announces this rate, anybody can join, etc.
Eric, I want to go back to you've got till the end of 2012 to opt out. You know, I'm looking at one of your earlier slides, and we've got 2,300 residential customers who at this point don't want it. And it may be more or less by the time it all plays out. But if 500 of them, I'm just picking a number out of thin air, are convinced that smart meters cause birth defects, give them brain tumors, whatever. So you got 500 folks who essentially, if they sign up for the opt-out, per this policy, in their minds, are prisoners in their present homes. Because if they move, and I don't know what the rate is, 10% a year, we got 50 SMUD customers a year who want to move but feel like they're trapped in their homes. And we talked about reputational risk. It seems to me, at some point down the line, we're going to hear about this. Have you guys given that any thought?
We've been weighing, again, it's about balance. And you're right, Director Posner, there's always a risk with any direction. There's a very small percentage of customers that have extreme concerns that are not backed up by science or data. So that's something that, you know, we don't know the answer to exactly what we would measure or do. But that's part of what we're certainly weighing. And the recommendation tonight that we're discussing is attempting to balance all those elements.
I understand that. I've been here long enough to have seen groups of people come into the auditorium who are not happy with us. And let me be clear, I have no sympathy. Well, I have some sympathy for people who have convinced themselves, because if you think this is going to give you a stomachache, it will.
Right.
But, you know, clearly their concerns are unfounded in my mind. But on the other hand, we talk a lot about reputational risk, and if you have a growing number of people over time who feel like SMUD's not letting me move, I think that's going to cause a problem.
Well, one of the things that we've done so far with it, before that we have an opt-out policy, is that we've weighed those particular customers that have an extreme concern around health. And so far, if they have, you know, come to us with a doctor's letter and, you know, again, by discretion, you know, we use that prudent judgment to try to weigh the situation and work with those on an individual case-by-case basis. So at this point, our experience has been, those have been, and Eric and Vicki may have their numbers, I don't have off the top of my head, but 2. Okay, so very small, 2 customers, in which case we took the meter out, and for that very reason, again, we're weighing sincerely wanting to help that customer also avoid reputational risk for SMUD. So my again, thinking on the fly here in terms of analysis, we would certainly, if we saw that a trend was occurring, or if there was a group of customers that were having those types of health concerns, we would certainly, you know, be proactive in dealing with a response that we felt was appropriate.
I think the other thing, I think we just also need to be upfront that we're actually looking at this as a bridging policy with the idea that over time, all of our customers at some point do have smart meters installed. I mean, this is seen as I think we view this as staff as kind of an interim approach to get us from where we are to where what we consider to be the ultimate business goal. But a smooth landing or smoother landing.
Bill?
I don't see that we have provided any accommodation for low-income customers in this. And what was your thinking in not doing that?
I think it was based on the intent to have full cost recovery from the customers that joined.
I think there's a couple of issues around that. One is the board did adopt a rate. We did talk about this when the board adopted the provisions around this. And at that time, the board didn't want a low-income subsidy associated with this. But the other challenge we quite frankly have with something, a subsidy such as this for low-income specifically, is in light of Prop 26. Adopting subsidies is much more difficult for municipal utilities. So that's the other thing we're weighing, is the risk of a challenge under Prop 26. It essentially grandfathers in your existing programs that are subsidized, and it doesn't mean that it has to be exact penny for penny, but it does mean that if you're adopting a subsidy because of a group for some reason, and it's explicit, and that you will likely run into a Prop 26.
So are you saying we're going to run into a Prop 26 problem when we get to TOU rates and trying to have a low-income version?
I think you may have, if you're not increasing the overall subsidy on a class basis, then you're probably all right under Prop 26, because you're not making the subsidy any worse.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think...
And I don't know how to do that, but I bet Jim Tracy does.
Because on the low-income side, I mean, these numbers are going to, preclude somebody from being able to do it, probably.
Question? So, Eric, you and your team have been interacting with all of these customers, and of the 2,500 customers, there's probably not a percentage that you can point to, but I on one hand understand there are customers who don't tell me what you're going to force on me, as opposed to I really think that there's some kind of electromagnetic something that's really making me sick, etc. I don't know how many out of 600,000 customers. It's really a pretty small percentage who. Pardon? Only 2 people who thought there was something.
That was the 2 that we took the meter out because they made enough of a concern about it. I would say it's less than 50 that had really directly told us, hey, I'm scared of the radio frequency. The rest of them have been some other reason. But there may be others that had that as a reason but just didn't state it. They just wanted to say, I don't want this.
Well, what resonates with me is this transition, that this is a bridging effort towards getting everyone on the smart meter grid. As far as somebody who feels trapped in their home, well, they may feel trapped in their home for a whole host of reasons.
You can always move to PG&E territory.
Go off grid, go to PG&E and pay $10. It's hard because we have 600,000 customers. We're talking about a small group.
I had a question for Elizabeth. So let's say we do this and we pass this, and there's some possible tweaking that I would suggest, maybe others might suggest, but let's say we pass this. Step me through what the article in the Sacramento Bee will look like.
Well, the headline would be something like SMUD adopts opt-out. I think that we would be able to work, and Chris Capper and the media team have been working very diligently on having a neutral story. I'm confident that we would be able to have a neutral story given the messaging points we've been discussing tonight. So I think it would be fact-based. I think it would be SMUD adopts out, SMUD board adopts out, if I can say it, opt-out policy. There you go. It's been a long day. And then it would, and simply, it would state, and this goes back to some of the earlier conversation, we would not communicate or discuss with the press the nuances around different rate, options or things like that are on the previous slide. For example, if it was 0.5% or 1% or something, we would simply, in a communication, be very direct and focused. This is our opt-out policy. This is what it is. And so we've been able to, on lots of complicated issues, we've been able to neutralize and mitigate negative press. And I think that our reputation, not only in the media but also in our greater customer community, is strong enough that by being straightforward, honest, focused in our communication, we'll be able to it would be neutral, factual, and I think the story would pretty much be a non-story pretty quickly.
Renee?
Were you done?
Go ahead.
I just want to say that I actually have another appointment this evening. I'm highly supportive of what you guys have come up with here. I think that this is a complicated issue, and I understand us kind of weighing, making sure we're not making it too easy for our customers to not go along with the program, but being responsive to customers who really think this is important to them personally. I think you've struck a right balance. I think $124.50 some a month is going to be very expensive for the vast majority of our customers. So I think in that we're sending rightly sending a signal that it costs the district money. We're willing to work with you if you're going to pick up the cost of this program. So I think you struck a right balance. I think anything more than that $124.27 would be so cost prohibitive that it would look like we weren't really giving them an option. So I appreciate your work on this and wanted to say I'm supportive of what you've got on the table here. So,
Larry?
I agree with Renee. There are so many moving parts to this thing, and I think you've thought through the implications of them all. I have a natural bias against one group subsidizing another, and even if it's 50 cents or 25 cents, it's my 25 cents. But that's just one variable in this whole thing. I'm sure if each of us were doing this, we would do it a little differently. I have a little concern about the backwash that we might get from people who have this installed who don't know that you can opt out. If that's publicized, we're liable to get a lot more folks involved. And the other thing that concerns me is the floor. We probably ought to set a number of, when we get down to this number of people, there's no more opt-out. And people should know that in advance. And people should also know they don't want to be the last one. If this is going to be a real cost-based system, they don't want to be the last one without the smart meter.
Go.
Having their personal assistant have to go read the meter, right? They'd have one person to one employee. I want to compliment that. This has really been tough to do, and I don't know about other directors, but I was inclined up until a couple of days ago to just say, I'm sorry, this is our system, and if you want to live in PG&E territory, have at it. But I think that, while emotionally that's how I feel about it, the reality is that we need to protect the district. And what this does is strikes that balance that hopefully can get us, 100%, right, within some period of time. I am a little concerned about the media stuff that would happen and other people, picking up the phone and calling somebody, well, yeah, get rid of mine too. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, about keeping that door open. How do others feel about that?
I think when they see the cost,
I think
think the cost will be self-regulating?
I think the $166 up front will convince them they could really afford a lot of tinfoil hats.
But they're already wearing them. Nancy?
So I was first contemplating the floor, right? Because that's the thing, once you get to a certain number, it's really expensive. But what could happen is that people could always rally up other people to try to keep it at a certain number, so it never hits a floor. Because, you look at, the whole Susan G. Komen craziness. That was 24 hours. That, 1 million people Twittered or Facebooked. I mean, we don't have that many people, but with social media, I mean, it's crazy how things can, I never would have imagined things would have spread like that. And so how do you cut off and make everybody happy? Because so we just say it's the 2,500 and that's it. So then you get the several other thousand. What if me in that 2,500 wants to keep it at that? Say I can't afford the $40 a month, so I'll just make sure that I get enough people rallied up to stay in it. So I mean, that's where I struggle with a floor and then a ceiling, because you're not, there's always that what if. And so I didn't see a floor or ceiling option in here, so I don't.
I do have, in addition to Arlen's PG&E anecdote, the numbers that I've heard coming from PG&E so far, they've been recruiting and they've contacted via phone and mail about 90% of the 92,000 people on their list. They have 4,400 enrollments so far. I don't know if it'll end there, but according to them, they've contacted 90% of the people, and out of the 92,000 on the list, they've had 4,400 sign up. I don't know if it'll be the same.
So even that $10 was too much? Because $10 seems...
They haven't been responding so far.
No, I don't want to pay an extra $10. I'll take the meter instead.
So if we just say we send out these letters, is it going to say in the letter that because that's the thing, is that contingency, right? We send out the letter. Are we going to show them the different price differentials of users? I mean, that's what I'm saying. No. So what if we send out the letter and we only get 200 people back?
Elizabeth?
The plan was to simply state what the rate was going to be. So, for example, if the recommendation would be on the right here, these particular pricing, that would be what we would state in the letter. The 127 up front and 39.
And it will say that that's an estimate, or that's the price?
That would because what the recommendation is you're adopting this evening would be this pricing within, as we discussed before, the discretion of the general manager. Should we see, for example, that we don't have anybody signing up except for a small number, then we would come back to, and the general manager could say, well, we could amend.
But again, when I read the letter, will it say to me, this is the price, or will it kind of...
Yes, it would say this is the price. Okay. And that is, by the way, also how PG&E is communicating and other utilities. Correct.
It seems to me that...
Can I... Oh, sorry.
This will be...
Who's next? Chairman?
Bill and then Genevieve.
Okay.
I saw him first.
I think we talked a while ago about the fact that, this is going to end up, in order to be able to do this, it's going to cost the district some money to do. We're not going to recover the cost. And the question is scale. In the scheme of things of this district, if it's $200,000 a year until we get to zero, am I wrong? It's 200, the ongoing?
130 plus, yeah.
139 a year.
Okay, so 140, 150 grand a year. In the scale of things of a $1.2 billion utility, it's a rather modest expense to get past the reputational risk of the problem. That's my reaction.
There's another option at some point if those numbers decline over time. The board always has the option to close a rate and make people move to something else. So if we were down to I don't know what that number is, but if we got down to a relatively low number, then the board, through a future rate process, could say, you know what, there's no more opt-out, and those remaining, I'll make it up, 90 customers must move to a smart meter. So that would be another time where you could cut off that ongoing cost. Plus, you might actually over time just decide, you know what, if you want to stay, we're going to increase it by quite a bit, so you're covering those costs.
Genevieve?
I think I'm not that concerned about the reputational risk. I think you've assessed it and you've figured out a path. And part of the reason why is because we have worked so hard to get that 95% customer satisfaction. We just got that validated again with our customers. And also we just got the J.D. Power #1 customers. I mean, we have been really keeping a pulse on our customers. That's the thing on the Coleman Planned Parenthood thing. Okay. Planned Parenthood really has kept a very, very strong pulse on supporter satisfaction, what have you. Perhaps Coleman didn't. And I'm wondering, actually, in this climate right now where there's a prospect of the city of Sacramento possibly subsidizing quite dramatically a new arena, if anything, it might be the reverse. What? We're going to subsidize these handful of customers? Why? So I almost wonder if it might be a reverse reaction from our customers as opposed to, an opening up the floodgates of people. Oh, I want to opt out. What for? Why would you want to opt out when we have been communicating with you and talking to you about the reasons for it, and the advantages for it, and how in the long run it's going to be better for all of us. So, anyways, long story short, I'm okay. What's our next step? Do we have to start a rate action, or?
No, we've already provided for it.
No, if the board were to move forward with either this policy or a variation of this policy, then that approval ends it because you've already got the mechanism approved in the last rate process.
That's right, we did. We did have that little placeholder.
How do people feel about this being a minimum charge? About this being the minimum charge?
Communicate this, give an indication of this fee is based on the number of people who will sign up, and go out those people, as that number decreases.
That's something Thank you. That's something that we can certainly do if the board would like to be explicit about this being a minimum charge.
Well, the board should do that. The question was, if people understood up front that this fee is based on the number of people who actually signed up or who have opted out of this form, and we will recover costs. So as those numbers decrease, this fee will go up.
But that's the same thing as saying you just get all your friends to keep them.
Yeah, but the problem is once you send that message, then the assumption is the reverse could also be true too.
Yeah.
That the more people you sign up to this, the cost will be lower.
But unlike Susan B. Coleman, this requires you to pay.
They got to be good friends.
I would support a minimum charge if this is the communication the minimum
I was
charge.
concerned about the backlash, but who's going to pay that?
Yeah. I don't know how other people feel, but I would.
Well, but if you're not communicating this, we're just trying to do this conceptually as a fully costed concept. It's not. We don't have the exact number. Nobody knows what the exact number is. So we're doing an approximation, and that's our starting point of where we are. But I don't see any words in here that say that we're committing that if more people sign up, that it's going to be a lower cost per month.
Yeah, I think Jim has some input here.
No, I was just going to say in response to a comment that Director Slayton made, as it keeps going down, what the cost would be per year. If it got down to 50 or 100 customers, there are other options than to continue to do it through a computerized system. You do a manual bill. A manual read, manual bill, but it's a lot cheaper than $130,000 a year. I know but
Paul just nixed that.
But I mean, as the number of customers drop, of course the staff is going to look at this, and these are the numbers that are based on an assumption of 2,500 customers. This is the most efficient way of doing it for 2,500 customers. If it got down to 100 or 50 customers, we would relook at this and say, what's the most cost-effective way of reading 50 customers? We might do it every other month, a manual read. Right. And then you're only reading it 6 times a year instead of 12 times. So staff is always going to look at what is the best and most cost-efficient way of supporting a program like this. And so taking these numbers in absolute,
So to kind of bring this issue, the variables we've been talking about to a head, is the staff comfortable that if we do it this way, that we have the best chance of a number that dwindles below 2,300 down to something? Is that how you feel?
It sounds like based on what PG&E has done with much smaller charges, that
Exactly.
the drop is dramatic.
Yeah. So I'd be in favor of doing it exactly as you propose with no tweaking.
What? Rob?
Yeah, thanks. I have to hand it to staff for sticking with this project. I've had actually a hard time.
They had no choice.
But you obviously worked very hard on it, and I think came up with a great solution. And I have to admit, it's been difficult to hear the presentation because I'm just stuck thinking, how can they not want one? And so somehow you've overcome that which I've not been able to. So thank you for this, and I'll support this on the consent calendar if that's where it goes. Thanks.
Well, President Bowie Thompson.
Larry got me thinking. I support all this, but I would support saying that when you send out the letter that this is the minimum charge. I would support that.
But what we're being asked to approve now does not write the specifics of the letter.
That's
Does it?
what we've already voted on the rate tariff. We're on the recommended policy, right?
I mean, the policy doesn't show us what the letter is going to say.
What the board is approving tonight is the recommendation that's been outlined on the earlier slide that describes what the tariff is, what the scope of who's participating in it is. And Arlen, it's in the packet. There's a detailed one-pager that provides this precise language.
Jim?
Yeah, as in regards to minimum charges, you have to be careful because the the industry standard for a minimum charge is that, okay, the minimum charge is $40, but that means you're under the existing tariff, and whatever the bill is calculated to be, you calculate the bill, and if the bill is $30, you still charge them $40. So it's not really collecting these costs. And if you're talking about a minimum charge where you're saying that's the minimum charge and now we're going to add on top of it the energy charges, it's not really much different than what we're talking about, just adding it as a fixed cost. Now, I don't know if I'm explaining that to you. In the utility industry, when you say you're going to have a minimum charge, you say $50 is the minimum charge, but then you go and you read the meter, you calculate what the bill would be, with a customer charge and the energy charge, and you're going to charge them $50. The minimum, you're going to charge them at least $50, even if their usage comes out to be less.
My comment was nothing about usage, is that basically they couldn't get all their friends to try to drive down this price, that this would be the minimum monthly fee that we would charge. That's what I'm trying to head off is, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't opt out, but anyways, I mean, I'm trying to, a mechanism so that people don't think that if they get more people on it, that the ongoing monthly fee could be driven down. So I'm just saying that we will not charge less than $39.40.
I mean, I think that if the letter goes out and says this is the charge, there's no indication that it's going to be more or less. It just this is the charge it's set at. They have to take the letter for its face value, and this is what I'm going to.
The fourth bullet is not going to be on there.
What's the fourth bullet?
General manager may revise the fee schedule. That's not
That's
part
correct.
On the letter. That's part of the
That's
policy.
not part of the communication.
We're giving the discretion to the general manager.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's not in the communication.
Therefore, it just says, here's the price. This is what the price is.
Correct.
So that, I think, solves that, because we're not saying it's the price depending on how many people show up.
That was precisely the rationale that we said. We state a price, and so we don't need to get into how many people is on it, what we expect. This is what you're going to pay, and then caveat that obviously we're going to have a chance. By board that we can actually always go back and periodically update it, but that's within the policy itself.
Considering our discussion, I can imagine the discussion you must have had when you put this together.
When Eric said 6 months, he meant 6 months.
But I have to say it's really a rational approach to this, and it balances all of the directives that we've asked you to do. My visceral response is I don't want to subsidize anybody anything. And when I did this at PINA the other night, just asked for a show of hands. 99% of the hands said cut them off if they don't want the new meter. So that's their response too. But I think this is a better response.
Let me suggest I was for an issue like this. I was initially thinking that we would put this on consent. But since there's such a community-wide impact, we'd have a short presentation. But I'm thinking, and Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, that the less that's said about this, the better off we are.
That's correct, Dr. Posner. Doctor Director.
My mother would be so proud.
It is late.
Mandated by your
you get a complimentary promotion if it goes on consent.
Yes, assuming that's a promotion. Okay. So, with the advice of our guru down at the end of the table, I'm going to suggest that we put this on consent. And the hour of 7:10 having arrived, I'm also going to suggest that unless there's any other business to come before us, we ought to go home. So ordered. Everybody go home. And please use the back garage. Paul.
Okay. I really want to give a special thanks to Eric and really the team here that you see here. This actually took really many months, and I want to thank the board for supporting.
And not just for the development of the policy, but the entire rollout has been fabulous.
You're welcome. I'll pass
Thank you, Eric.
thanks on to everybody.